In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a basic 2x2 experiment. And in this case, I have a dependent variable of number of sex partners. This was some data I just collected. So I asked them how many sex partners did they have. I asked them about their gender. That's going to be one of my independent variables. And one of my hypotheses is I believe that men are going to have more sex partners than women in this sample. And then the other independent variable is impulsivity, which I have a 10-item survey for. And my hypothesis is that people who are more impulsive are also going to have more sex partners. And then additionally, I have the hypothesis that there's going to be an interaction between impulsivity and gender, so that this relationship between impulsivity and sex partners will be especially strong among males as opposed to females. In other words, men who are impulsive, I expect to have way more sex partners than men who aren't impulsive, where I don't think impulsivity is going to have as big of an effect on females in terms of how many sex partners they have. So the first step in setting up this experiment is to make sure that I have a dependent variable that's continuous, which in this case, since it's number of sex partners, it's nice and continuous. They're all just numbers here. And then making sure I have two independent variables that are categorical, meaning that they just have two levels in this case, since I want to make this a 2x2 experiment. So for gender, I don't have to worry anything because they're already split into two groups, male and female. But for impulsivity, right now it's a survey, so I have to convert that into one impulsivity score, and then I have to make that score categorical, so that I divide people who are just high in impulsivity versus low in impulsivity, making that into two groups. So the first thing I want to do with this scale is figure out if any of these items need to be reverse scored. Most of these items have to do with high impulsivity, like I often have extraneous or racing thoughts. But there's a few in here that do need to be reverse scored because they imply low impulsivity. So for example, this one, I am self-controlled. That should be low impulsivity, so that needs to be reverse scored. So I'm just going to start by putting a little undercase R right there. We actually have 3 in a row that should be underscored, like I plan trips well ahead of time. That's low impulsivity. And I find it easy to concentrate on things. That's also low impulsivity. And the rest, like I often do things without thinking, I often say things without thinking, all the rest of them have to do with high impulsivity, so we can just keep those the same. But so let's go ahead and reverse score these. So to do that, go to transform, recode into a different variable, and we're just going to pop these into the input variable box, and then we're going to give them the same name that they have before, just without that underscore R. And then since these were all on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 meaning strongly disagree, 5 meaning strongly agree, in old new values, we're just going to flip it so that a 1 becomes a 5, 2 becomes a 4, a 3 remains a 3, 4 becomes a 2, and 5 becomes a 1. So there we have. And just to make sure that we did this right, it should read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on this side. So we did that correctly, so we can hit continue, OK. And it creates these new reverse scored items right there. They're just the reverse of what was answered in these. So now that we have a version of each of these scale scores that's pointed in the right direction, with 5 meaning impulsive and low meaning not impulsive, we can go ahead and make an average score for impulsivity just by adding all these up and dividing by 10. Of course, we'll ignore these that ended in underscore R. So to do that, we'll go transform, compute variable, and we'll just call this variable impulsivity. And for this, we're going to start with the parentheses and then add them all up. So impulsive 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to go ahead and skip these and do impulsive 5, 6, and 7. And then go back up here to get the rest of them. So we should have 10 of them. And of course, we're going to divide by 10 to make an average score. So go ahead and hit compute. And now if we go to data view, we should have, there we go, an average score. And you'll notice sometimes you'll have a missing data point. That just means that they forgot to maybe put one of the answers in, but that's fine. We'll just keep it like that. So then the last step of converting this to a categorical variable is then to figure out what's the mean impulsivity score, so we can say that everyone who's above the mean is high impulsivity and everyone who's below the mean is low impulsivity. So here the best way to do that is first is to figure out what the mean is. So you can go Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Frequencies, and just pop in that little impulsivity variable and go to Statistics and just check off mean. That's all we need. Hit Continue. You can also check off where it says Display Frequency Tables. Just turn that off because we don't need that. Click OK. And it gives you the mean. And in this case, the mean is right around 3. It's 2.97 or 2.98 if we rounded it up. So then to make a categorical variable where everybody below this is low and everybody above this is high in impulsivity, we're going to go transform, recode into a different variable. We'll go ahead and reset all of this. And we'll take this impulsivity and we'll make a new variable called impulsivity HL, standing for high-low. And you can name it whatever you like. That's just what I usually name a variable if I'm doing a high and low version of it. So I'll hit change, and I'll just type in here impulsivity. And under old and new values, what you're going to do is go range lowest through this value. And for this, what the value is, go ahead and take whatever number you have as a mean to be your lowest. So in this case, we'll round it up to 2.98. And we're going to convert this into a 1. 1 is going to end up being our low group. So if you look at this, it says the lowest value through 2.98. We're going to convert all that to 1. And then here, go 1 decimal above that, so 2.99. We're going to convert all of that to a 2. Make sure to check off range value through highest for this one. Click Add, and now it says 2.99 through highest value equals 2. So basically we split everyone up. Those who are at or equal to the mean are going to be the low group, and those who are above the mean are going to equal a high group. You want to make sure that these two numbers aren't the same though, because it'll be confused about what to convert someone if they happen to be a 2.98. So go ahead and click Continue. OK. Pops in our variable right here. And last thing is we want to just go into values and establish that 1 means low, low impulsivity, and 2 means high. There we go. So now if we go back to data view, we have everybody divided into low and high impulsivity. We should have about equal numbers of each because we divided right along the center line or the mean. So now we have, and I'll move this one up because this is all we're going to be concerned with now. We have our dependent variable, which is number of sex partners. We have our two independent variables, which is gender and low and high impulsivity. So now we can go ahead and set up that 2x2 factorial analysis. For this, we're going to be using a Factorial ANOVA. So go to Analyze, General Linear Model, Univariate. Univariate means we're assessing one dependent variable. So our one dependent variable in this case is going to be sex count, or how many sex partners they had. And our fixed variables is going to be gender and impulsivity high-low. We also want to set up a plot so we can put any one on the horizontal axis in the separate lines. Click Add. But I like to make a version of each just in case one makes more sense to me. So I'll go ahead and create the opposite version too. They'll show the same results, they'll just show it kind of differently. So I'll click Continue. And then under Options, make sure to click Descriptive Statistics so that we get the means and standard deviations for each group. And again, hit Continue. So here we're going to hit OK and see what our results are. So it looks like, and I'm going to skip down here to where it shows significance, it looks like all the hypotheses turned out to be true. Then in fact, gender was significant. If we look over here, gender, we scan over here, it was significant. And if we kind of come back up here, we see that the males had on average about 3 sex partners, and the females had on average about 1.4 sex partners. So that first hypothesis turned out to be true. Males had more sex partners than females. It was also shown that impulsivity was quite significant as well. Again, we can see that by looking under impulsivity, here total low, so those who were low in impulsivity had about 1.25 sex partners, and those who were high in impulsivity had more around 2.7 sex partners. So that again turned out to be correct. And lastly, I thought that there would be a significant interaction between gender and impulsivity, where impulsivity would have a greater effect on number of sex partners of men versus women. We do have a significant interaction. This is at or below 0.05. And if we scroll down here, I kind of like the second graph the best because it splits men and women into separate lines. We can see that that's exactly the case. That for women, impulsivity had somewhat of an effect. It caused them to go from maybe about a little bit under one sex partner to a little bit above one sex partner. But it had a much larger effect for men. So low impulsive men had under 2 sex partners, about 1.5, whereas high impulsive men had like 4.5. That's a much stronger effect. So in this case, I had 3 significant findings. I'm going to go ahead and put this over here and then write up my results in a Word document on this side. Let me go ahead and blow this up a little bit so it's easier for you guys to read. So in this case, we had 3 hypotheses. They all turned out to be correct, but that's okay if yours don't end up being correct. You'll write them up in pretty much the exact same way. So for this first one, you could say, I'll just set it up with saying, we ran a 2 by 2 factorial ANOVA assessing the effects of gender and impulsivity on number of sex partners. So this first one is just telling us basically what kind of analyses we ran. Like I say, it was found that men had significantly more sex partners than women. It was also found that those who were high in impulsivity had more sex partners than those who were low in impulsivity. Lastly, it was found that there was an interaction between gender and impulsivity on number of sex partners, in that impulsivity caused men to have far more sex partners. Well, let me actually rephrase that a little bit, because it's kind of hard to phrase interactions, but let me rephrase a little bit, in that men with high impulsivity had many more sex partners than men with low impulsivity. While impulsivity had a much less strong effect on women. There's many ways in which you could talk about this interaction. This is just one that sort of came off the top of my head here. You could probably also say that just impulsivity had a stronger effect in determining sex partners in males than in females. But I think this is a little bit more descriptive. So we basically wrote out our results in plain English first, and then we'll add our statistics. So for this case, we want to do is first add in the means and standard deviations for any groups that we're talking about. So for example, it was found that men had significantly more sex partners than women. Well, first we want to add in the mean and standard deviation for the men, and then the mean and standard deviation for women. And I'll just put these as sort of placeholders for now. In fact, I'll just copy so I can paste this into other places. It was also found that those who were high in impulsivity had more sex partners, put a little mean standard deviation there, than those who were low in impulsivity. And then usually when talking about an interaction, you don't really need to put in means and standard deviations unless you talk about specific groups. So in this case it says, in that men with high impulsivity had many more sex partners. I'll go ahead and put a mean and standard deviation for the men who are high in impulsivity than men with low impulsivity. While impulsivity had a much less strong effect on women, and I'll just kind of leave that blank because I don't talk about any more specific groups there. So under interaction, it's sort of up to your discretion whether you're going to put in means and standard deviations, but if you're talking about specific groups and how they were set apart from others, I would go ahead and put those in. So to get those means and standard deviations, we're going to look up at the descriptive box right here. So for example, men with sex partners, we're going to look up male, total, and they had 2.98. You always want to round to the 100th place, but it's already been done for you here. And their standard deviation was 7.10. Versus women who had a mean of 1.40 and a standard deviation of 2.14. And then for impulsivity, those who had high impulsivity, this group, had a mean of total high impulsivity equals 2.68, with a standard deviation of 6.27. Then those who were low impulsivity, they had an average of 1.25 and a standard deviation of 1.60. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit, or I wanted to show the means for this who had men who are at high impulsivity. So here we go, men who had high impulsivity, they had a mean of 4.59, and they had a standard deviation of 10.22, very high standard deviation, a lot of variance there. Versus men who had low impulsivity, that would be male low, 1.69, and standard deviation of 2.01. There we go. So I put in all the means and standard deviations. The only time I care about male low, male high, female low, female high is when I'm talking about the interactions. Otherwise, I'm always going to be looking at the total rows. So male total, female total, or total low impulsivity, total high impulsivity. So there is all the means and standard deviations. Now we want to start putting in some of the F statistics from this. Basically wherever there's significance or non-significance. So first this one, for the significance of gender, put a little comma in there. That was an F test. And for the degrees of freedom, you always want to start with the df of the actual variable. So here I'm looking at gender, and the df was a 1. And then the df for the error. So here it's error, and it was 330. And for a 2x2 experiment, your df for all of them are going to be the exact same thing. So you notice the df for all of these are 1s across the board, and the df for error is always going to be, of course, 330. So we'll keep that the same for all of these F statistics. So in this case, the actual F statistic was 11.76, and it was very significant, well below 0.01. So instead of writing 0.001, we can only round to the 100th place. So we're just going to put in p is less than 0.01. And then we're going to move on to the next F statistic here. So in this case, it's for impulsivity. So impulsivity right here has, again, the same, it's an F statistic, same degrees of freedom, 1, 330. And in this case, the F statistic is 13.09. And again, it's well below 0.01, so we're just going to do p is less than 0.01, because we can only go to the 100th place. And the last one was the interaction. It says there was a significant interaction between gender and impulsivity on sex partners. So there we're also going to put in F. It's going to be the same thing for the DF. In this case, the F statistic was 4.01. In this case, the p-value, we can go ahead and write this in. We'd round this to 0.05. So it just was significant. So p equals 0.05. So there we go. We've written in all the statistics. And one last thing we need to do is make sure to italicize any statistical acronyms, meaning any single or double letters that stand for a statistic. So here it's going to be all the M's, SD's, F's, and P's. So there's most of our results. The last thing I like to do is add figures to this. We already have one figure here, which is our line graph. Let's put that in right where we mentioned the significant interaction. So right here, we're going to put a little figure in here. We're not going to number it yet. We'll put a little placeholder because we want to figure out where we want to put other figures. I'll just put figure X for right now, but that's definitely one we want to put in. But also we have some main effects right here, and even though we haven't created graphs for those yet, we will. So for this first one, you want to put a figure for the main effect of gender on sexual or sex partners. So that would be figure X. And then also the same thing, since impulsivity was significant, you want to put that in there as well. Most of the time, you only want to put figures in for significant findings, but for this research project, for your presentation, I want you to do figures for every finding, your two main effects and your interaction, even if they aren't significant. So once you pop in all the figures, go ahead and look through them and then number them 1 through whatever. You want to put in figure X first because you always want the first one to come up as 1, second one to come up as 2, and so on. You don't want them to be out of order. So it looks like we have 3 figures here. In order to make figures, you want to create a separate page, which on Windows you can go with Control-Enter to create a second page. On Mac it's Command-Shift-Enter. And then we'll put in figure 1, create a new page, figure 2 and figure 3. And since we already have this graph here, let's go ahead and put that in. Now the graph doesn't look very well, or doesn't look very good right now, so just a few little editorial things that we can do to it to make it look a lot better. One is just to make sure that the background's white instead of gray, makes the lines pop out more. You might want to make the lines a little bit bigger. So here you can click on the lines, click on weight, and let's make that like a 3, so it's easier to see. And then just make sure that all the text is at least a 12-point font, so it's easy to see whether you have it on a PowerPoint or written out in a paper. You can also change any of the text that it maybe makes more sense. So for example, in this case, when it has estimated marginal means, it just always puts that for ANOVA. We could put in here, which is what this actually is number of sex partners. So to change text, all you do is click on it once, wait a second, and then click on it again, and then you can edit it. But impulsivity high-low makes sense, gender male-female makes sense. This doesn't make sense, this title. And if you want to just get rid of something, just again click on it, wait a sec, click on it again. You can just highlight all of it and get rid of it. Click off, and there you go. So if we close that, that looks like a much better graph. We can go ahead and copy special, make sure that image is selected. And then this is actually going to go above where it says figure 3. And we'll right click, click paste special, and make sure picture is selected, click OK. So there we go. And we'll go ahead and give this a title. This one is interaction between gender and impulsivity on number of sex partners. The last thing you want to do is italicize where it says figure 3. So there we have our third figure in there. Let's go ahead and make our figure 1 and 2, which were the main effects of gender and impulsivity. The best way to really exemplify a difference between two groups is with a bar graph. So we'll go ahead and make some bar graphs for those. We'll go graphs, legacy dialogues, bar. We're going to keep all this the same, just click define. And then right here where it says other statistic, go ahead and put that, and then put your dependent variable right here. In this case, it's sex count. Then put your independent variable where it says category axis. We'll do gender first. And then make sure to put in some error bars by clicking on options, display error bars, keep all this the same at 95% confidence. Click continue and OK. And we'll get a nice little error bar. Right here you can see we had a lot of variance for guys, not so much for women, but since these bars aren't overlapping, that again means it's a significant difference. Now again, you might want to change just a couple of things about this. Really for this one, just change the background and then make sure all the text is a nice good 12-point font. Mean number of sex partners, that's actually fine, that makes sense. So we can keep that the same. And you can also keep where it says error bar set at 95% confidence, that's fine. But just make again sure that it's a big enough font to read, at least a 12-point font or bigger. So after you've done that, you can change the color bars if you want to. You don't need to though. So you click out of that and then again copy it and paste it in here. There we go. We could say difference between males and females in number of sex partners, and italicize that. And then the last thing we need to do is kind of the same thing, but for impulsivity. I'll just call upon that again. And here I'll just switch out gender for impulsivity and click OK. There again, we see our big effect. I'm just going to change the background color and just make sure that all the text is nice and big, easy to read. And copy and paste that in here. And I'm just going to go difference. Well, I'll sort of just copy and paste what I had here, but instead of males, females, I'll go between those who were low in impulsivity, and those who were high in impulsivity in number of sex partners. And again, just italicize where it says figure 2. So there's the whole results section. We have all of our results written in plain English, along with all the statistics that are appropriate, and then we have our 3 figures for the 2 main effects and the interaction. So that's it.